He ate dinner with him. He traveled with him for 3 years. He watched him heal the blind. He watched him raise the dead. He saw miracles that no human being should be able to perform. And then he walked up to him, kissed him on the cheek, and handed him over to be tortured and killed for 30 pieces of silver. Judas Iscariot committed the most infamous betrayal in human history, and for 2,000 years, the world has called him a monster. But what if he wasn't? What if the psychology behind what Judas did is so disturbingly human that it's something you've already done yourself? Before we decode the psychology of the betrayal, we need to understand who Judas actually was, because the man who sold Jesus for silver was not always a villain. Judas was one of 12, handpicked by Jesus himself. He didn't stumble into the group by accident. He was chosen. He was the treasurer of the disciples, the one trusted with the money. In that era, being the financial manager meant you were considered reliable, responsible, organized. Judas was the one they trusted with resources. He walked the same roads. He heard the same sermons. He witnessed the same miracles. For 3 years, Judas lived closer to Jesus than almost anyone on earth. So, what happened? How does someone go from devoted follower to history's most hated traitor? The answer isn't simple, and that's exactly what makes it terrifying. Because there wasn't one reason. There were four psychological forces that collided inside one man's mind. Forces that are still operating inside yours right now. To understand Judas, you have to understand what he believed Jesus was going to do. In first century Judea, the Jewish people were living under Roman occupation. They were oppressed, humiliated, taxed into poverty, and they were waiting for a Messiah, a military deliverer who would overthrow Rome, restore Israel's power, and establish a kingdom on earth. Many scholars believe that Judas, like most Jews of his time, expected Jesus to be that political Messiah, a warrior king, a liberator. And for a while, it looked like it might happen. Jesus was drawing crowds of thousands. He was performing miracles. He was challenging the religious establishment. The energy was building. The revolution felt close. But then, Jesus started saying things that didn't fit the plan. My kingdom is not of this world. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. Imagine investing 3 years of your life into following someone you believe will change the world, and then slowly realizing they have no intention of doing it the way you expected. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that comes from holding two conflicting beliefs. Judas believed Jesus was the Messiah, but the Messiah Judas wanted and the Messiah Jesus actually was were two completely different people. And cognitive dissonance doesn't just create confusion, it creates resentment. When the person you've pinned all your hopes on disappoints you, the love can curdle into something dark. You've felt this. Maybe not with a Messiah, but with a parent who didn't become who you needed them to be, a partner who changed, a career that didn't deliver what it promised. The dream dies, and something cold takes its place. That coldness was growing inside Judas, and he probably didn't even recognize it. Now, let's talk about the money, 30 pieces of silver. In today's currency, roughly $600. That's it. $600 for the life of the Son of God. It seems absurd, and a lot of people use this to argue that Judas was just greedy. End of story. But it's more complicated than that. The Gospel of John tells us something chilling. John chapter 12, verse 6. Judas did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Judas was stealing from the group, skimming off the top, and he'd probably been doing it for a long time. And now, here's the psychology. When a person begins engaging in small acts of dishonesty, something happens to their moral compass. Behavioral psychologist Dan Ariely calls this the Fudge factor, the mental space where people can cheat a little bit, while still maintaining their self-image as a good person. Judas didn't wake up one day and decide to betray Jesus. He started with small compromises, a few coins here, a little skim there. Each small act of dishonesty widened the gap between who he thought he was and who he was actually becoming. By the time the chief priests offered him 30 pieces of silver, Judas had already been betraying the group's trust for months, maybe years. The final betrayal wasn't a sudden fall. It was the last step on a staircase he'd been descending, one step at a time. This is the psychology of moral erosion. You don't become a betrayer overnight. You become one through 1,000 tiny compromises that you barely notice. And that's what makes this so haunting. Because you know those compromises, the small lies you tell yourself, the corners you cut, the values you quietly set aside when nobody's watching. Judas didn't start as a monster. He started as a man who told himself that the small stuff didn't matter. There's a theory, explored by scholars and theologians, that Judas wasn't just motivated by greed or disillusionment, he was motivated by fear. The political situation in Jerusalem was a pressure cooker. The Roman authorities were watching Jesus closely. The Jewish religious leaders were plotting to destroy him, and anyone associated with Jesus was in danger. Judas may have done the math, and he may have looked at the situation and thought, this movement is going to get us all killed. Rome will crush us. The Sanhedrin will come for all of us. I need to get out. Psychologists call this threat-induced betrayal, when a person betrays a group not out of malice, but out of survival instinct. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, takes over, and rational loyalty gets overridden by the primal need to protect yourself. Think about wartime. Think about people who informed on their neighbors during the Holocaust, or during Stalin's purges. Many of them weren't evil. They were terrified, and terror makes people do things that their normal selves would consider unthinkable. Judas may have believed that handing Jesus over was a way to save himself and the other disciples. That if the authorities got what they wanted, Jesus, they would leave the rest of the group alone. The cruelest part, he may have genuinely believed he was doing the right thing, that he was protecting people, that the sacrifice of one would save the many. Self-deception at its most devastating. And here's what the ancient text at CIRCE Institute's analysis reveals. Judas didn't just betray Jesus, he orchestrated plausible deniability. He planned to be able to tell the other apostles that the soldiers must have secretly followed him. He arranged it so he could maintain his facade of innocence. He wanted to betray and still be seen as loyal, to sin and still be seen as righteous. How human is that? This is the most unsettling theory of all. Some scholars argue that Judas believed that he was actually helping Jesus fulfill his destiny. The Old Testament prophecies spoke of a suffering Messiah. Isaiah 53 describes a man despised and rejected who would bear the sins of many. The prophecies required a betrayal. They required suffering. What if Judas knew this? What if he thought, someone has to do this? Someone has to be the one who hands him over. If this is God's plan, then I'm just playing my part. Psychologically, this is called moral justification through higher purpose. The ability to commit a terrible act by believing it serves a greater good. It's the same psychology behind every person who has ever committed an atrocity in the name of God, country, or ideology. I'm not betraying him, I'm fulfilling prophecy. I'm not evil, it's I'm necessary. The horror of this theory is that Judas may have walked into that garden with a clear conscience. He may have kissed Jesus on the cheek and believed, truly believed, that he was doing what God required. And then, when he saw Jesus condemned, when he saw the blood, when he realized that his higher purpose had resulted in the torture of someone he loved, the psychological collapse was total. Matthew 27, verse 3-5 says, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. Then he went away and hanged himself. He returned the money, he confessed, and then he couldn't live with what he'd done. This isn't the behavior of a villain. This is the behavior of a man whose psychological defenses collapsed all at once. Every justification, every rationalization, every story he'd told himself about why it was okay. All of it shattered in a single moment of clarity. And the weight of that clarity killed him. And this is where the story stops being about Judas and starts being about you. Because here's the thing that will haunt you. You've been Judas, not at the same scale, not with the same consequences, but the psychological forces that drove him, you know every single one of them. You've been disillusioned with someone you believed in, and let that disillusionment curdle into resentment. You've made small compromises with your integrity, and told yourself they didn't matter. You've betrayed someone you cared about, not out of hatred, but out of fear. And you've justified your worst decisions by telling yourself you had no choice. that it was necessary, that it served a greater purpose. Judas wasn't a demon. He was a man caught between faith and fear, loyalty and self-preservation, hope and disillusionment. And the reason this story has haunted humanity for 2,000 years isn't because Judas was uniquely evil. It's because he was terrifyingly ordinary. The ancient CIRCE Institute analysis puts it this way: entering deeply into the labyrinth of Holy Week allows us a space in which to contemplate the ways in which we are all the Judas who betrays. All of us. But here's the part of the story that breaks my heart every time. And it's the part that almost nobody talks about. Peter also betrayed Jesus that night. He denied him 3 times. He cursed. He lied. He ran. And after the resurrection, Jesus found Peter, and he restored him. 3 denials, 3 questions. Do you love me? 3 restorations. Peter got a second chance. Peter became the rock on which the church was built. Judas hanged himself before the resurrection. He never saw Sunday morning. The difference between Peter and Judas wasn't the sin. They both betrayed Jesus on the same night. The difference was that Peter waited. Peter stayed alive long enough to see that grace was possible. Judas decided his story was over, 1 chapter too early. And maybe that's the deepest psychological truth in this entire story. The most dangerous moment in any human life isn't the moment of failure. It's the moment after failure, when you decide whether your story is over or whether there's still a chapter left. Judas decided there wasn't. What about you? If this video made you think, if it made you see Judas differently, see yourself differently, see the Bible differently, then this channel is for you. Every video we make decodes the psychology hidden inside the most powerful stories ever written, the stories that shape civilization, the stories that still shape you. Subscribe, hit the bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.